Alright, this week I'm going to be talking about handstand push-ups and how to develop them for people of different levels. And the first thing I really want to mention is that handstand push-ups have really become a lot more common in recent years, primarily due to CrossFit and their heavy use of gymnastics movements in their programming and competition and all that sort of stuff. And so a lot of people feel like the need essentially to do handstand push-ups or the desire to do handstand push-ups, but that doesn't necessarily mean people should or need to or should be doing handstand push-ups. And that's something that's often overlooked. A lot of coaches will give people movements because someone somewhere at some point in time deemed them functional or something else along those lines. And that's really not a good reason to give someone a particular movement. The only reason you should be doing a movement is because it's actually going to help you reach your goals and in a safe and efficient way. And so most people just want to look good and feel good and have longevity. And for those people, there's really no need for them to do handstand push-ups because, first of all, most of them maybe aren't going to be able to, at least at first, and a handstand push-up really isn't going to give them anything that pressing with a barbell or dumbbell or some other sort of pressing variations are going to do for them. So that's one of those points that I like to harp on, is that just as a client you should never feel the need to do a particular movement just because other people are doing it or anything like that. And as a coach, no coach should ever feel that they should give a person a movement just because it's functional or something like that. So keep it simple. You should only be doing the things that are actually going to help you achieve your goals. Now, there are certain times where handstand push-ups really are necessary. Obviously, if you're competing in a sport like CrossFit, you're going to have to be doing handstand push-ups and deficit handstand push-ups and ring handstand push-ups and handstand walking, because those are all part of the competition. So those are things that definitely need to be worked on. So for those people, that's fine. And then for in some other cases, for athletes who are kind of more in that sort of intermediate stage where they've been training for a while, maybe they need some more variety in their training. Handstand push-ups and variations thereof are a great way to get some variety in overhead pressing, and so that can be useful there. And then some people are just going to want to kind of mess around with that sort of thing because it's kind of a cool party trick. But the thing is, that's all it really is for most people. It's not necessary. It's just kind of a cool trick, especially when you can do them freestanding. So that's just the first thing that I wanted to mention. Most people don't need to do them, but for those that do, I'm going to explain how to really go through the process of developing that movement in a way that is actually going to lend itself to long-term progress, not just short-term progress. And so the first two things really that we want to think about are scapular strength and tricep strength. Now, scapular strength I listed first because that really is the most important, and that's something that's really overlooked because people just think of it as overhead pressing. Oh, it's just kind of the delts, triceps, things like that. But in reality, handstand push-ups, and it's kind of hard to demonstrate, but in terms of the kind of like the angle of the arms in relation to the torso, it's a little bit more like a behind the neck press if you're doing them up against a wall. If you're doing them freestanding, strict handstand push-ups, that's a little bit different. I'll get into that later. But it's a little bit more like a behind the neck press. It requires a great deal of scapular control, especially once you get into deficit handstand push-ups. That requires a lot of scapular control. You need that scapular strength to be able to position the upper body properly and to be able to generate the most amount of force. and prevent some of that pressing musculature, the normal pressing musculature from getting fatigued. So scapular strength is something that has to be developed first. So obviously you have to test it, pal raises, trap 3 raises, see what those are in relation to close grip bench press, and that's going to give you a decent idea of scapular strength. Tricep strength. Again, when you're doing them up against a wall, it's a little bit more like a behind the neck press. That's going to be more tricep as opposed to delts, although those are going to get fatigued as well, especially if you're doing a lot of them. But tricep strength is huge for doing handstand push-ups, especially high rep handstand push-ups. So you want, and again, so testing, you want to look at seated behind the neck press and how that compares to standing overhead press and also close grip bench press, and that's going to give you a decent idea of whether or not tricep strength is really lacking. And if it is, there are tons of ways to work on that. So if scapular strength is lacking, that's pretty simple. It's because you can do just the testing movement. So pal raises, trap 3 raises, do tons of those, and that's really going to help improve scapular strength. Tricep strength, again, go to the testing movement, seated behind the neck press. And obviously some people, that may be a very uncomfortable position for them to get into because they just don't have very good shoulder mobility. So obviously those people would not want to do that. But there are other ways to work on tricep strength. Obviously, Arnold presses where you have that rotation, that's great. Even tricep specific, isolation movements. So, tricep push downs. You can do that with a band. You can do that, on a cable machine. There are various, other, overhead tricep extensions. I would not recommend, normal tricep extensions. That tends to cause people a lot of elbow pain. It really irritates the elbows. Same with dumbbell rollbacks and things like that. Those can really irritate people's elbows, and so I tend to avoid those in my programming. But lots of options really for working on tricep strength. So once you've worked on those and built a decent base of strength in both the triceps and decent scap strength, and obviously you would be pressing from just normal standing presses, dumbbell presses, things like that, benching as well, just to build upper body strength. Handstand push-ups aren't going to be so much of a problem, and even if they are, you've now built a good base so that when you start doing handstand push-ups, you're now going to be able to recruit the proper muscles, and you're actually going to be doing them with good form instead of just arching your back like crazy in order to lock out your elbows. So once we've gone past that initial stage, we want to look at negatives. So negatives are a great way to work on a movement because you kind of overload that movement for someone who can't do it very well yet. And it works the same musculature, obviously, as the movement itself. So negatives, weighted negatives, are a great place to start. Even negatives to a deficit if they progress to that. That's a great place to start for people who really can't do a normal handstand push-up, or at least who can't do a lot of handstand push-ups. Negatives are great. And then we want to think about, and I didn't write this down, but I do think I mentioned this in a previous Whiteboard Wednesday. I think I was talking about autoregulation. But one of my favorite ways to really build volume of handstand push-ups is actually to shorten the range of motion. So, I'm going to have to squat down here a little bit. So a normal handstand push-up, your hands are coming down. Obviously, your head is, I guess your head is coming down, since obviously it would be the reverse of this. But your head is coming down to the level of the hands before you press back up. And so you can shorten that range of motion, put something underneath the position of the head, where your head is, and that's going to shorten that range of motion. So instead of doing that range of motion there, you'd actually be doing this range of motion here. And you can change that range of motion, you can increase it. And what I actually like to do is increase that each set. So you start someone out with just a very, very small range of motion, and that can actually be very challenging for some people who aren't used to it. Even if it's just a slight bending of the elbows, that can be very taxing. And then you can increase the depth the next set, the next set, the next set, until hopefully they get to the point where they're actually doing normal handstand push-ups, so where the head is coming down to the level of the hands, or even deficit handstand push-ups. You can do that as well. And so you can just really continue that process, and that's a great way to build volume on the muscles that are involved in handstand push-ups for people who can't really do a whole lot of full range of motion handstand push-ups yet. But once someone can do a number of full range of motion handstand push-ups, and my computer's about to die, you can start doing sets of that and really building volume with those. And that's fairly self-explanatory, really. The last thing is freestanding handstand push-ups. And with those, the biggest challenge is balance. For anyone who can do a decent weight for standing overhead press, for anyone who can do a bunch of normal handstand push-ups, the strength portion of freestanding handstand push-ups, whether they're kipping or strict, is not going to be an issue. What the issue is balance. And that's my biggest issue in doing freestanding handstand push-ups, and something that I still have a lot of room to improve on. The strength portion is easy, but balance can be very difficult, and that's something that just takes a lot of specific work on those freestanding variations. And I will say that I mentioned handstand push-ups up against a wall are a little bit more like a behind the neck press. Freestanding strict handstand push-ups are going to feel much more like pressing from in front of the neck, so just a normal standing overhead press, because of just the angle of the torso and the body. In order to keep that proper balance, it's going to feel much more like a standing overhead press. And so tricep strength and things like that are going to be a little bit less of a limiter in those cases. But again, when it comes to freestanding handstand push-ups, balance is going to be the toughest part. So I hope that gives you a few sort of guidelines in terms of how to develop handstand push-ups, and we'll see you next week.